The Second World War was the largest and deadliest battle in human history. 19 years after the end of the First World War, the world was again haunted by the shadow of increasingly worsening tensions and conflicts. In 1939, the silence again broke into merciless violence. Like lightning in the night, the darkness of war struck the world again, shaking hearts and tearing apart the fragile peace. On September 1st, 1939, when the sun rose on a calm morning, the world did not expect that this moment would be the beginning of destruction that had never been imagined before. German troops crossed the Polish border with full force of attack. It happened brutally and mercilessly showered the sky with explosions and surrounded Polish cities. In a matter of days, this small, peaceful country fell into ruin. The uncontrolled invasion of German troops ravaged Poland's weak defenses. The cities became rubble, and the Polish people fled in fear. At the same time, the world held its breath as they watched Germany's anger continue to spread. News of the attack spread quickly throughout the world, and on September 3rd, 1939, Great Britain and France, as Poland's allies, decided that they could no longer remain silent. Declared war on Germany, which had created an inevitable storm. But what they did not know was that the attack on Poland was only the beginning of a wave of destruction that would sweep the whole world. And this is the dark story of the history of the Second World War. In 1939, Germany was led by the Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler, believed his people were a superior race destined to conquer Europe. His troops had marched into Austria and Czechia, but the Second World War began when Hitler assigned the German Air Force, known as Luftwaffe, to repel Poland from the uncontrolled invasion of German troops. Poland's defenses were weak, the cities were reduced to rubble, and the Polish people ran around in deep fear. After 3 weeks of attack, the Polish capital fell into German hands.
Großen Linie, und in diesem Augenblick marschieren gerade. Polen hat den Kampf gewählt und es hat den Kampf nun erhalten.
After 3 weeks of attack, the Polish capital fell into German hands. Wooden synagogue roofs and burning them alive, and the German troops were just wondering when they would kill all the Poles. So the only option left for the population was to defend themselves and protect their families as best they could, even though slowly all the massacres were happening.
I remember seeing the dead horses and the ruined buildings. My mother burst crying, and she threw up when she saw everything that was happening. It was just such a shock.
We were simply overwhelmed by the German military might. It was a feeling of being in a trap. There was no way out.
The Germans started the terror immediately. They brought in the Orthodox rabbi and tied him up to the roof of the wooden synagogue and started a fire, and they all died right in front of my eyes.
After occupying Hitler's, Poland wanted to form a German empire by invading eastern countries, but Great Britain and France had a pact with Poland. So Great Britain and France declared war with
Just to
Germany.
bring you up to date on the news of Europe, if you were just turning on your radios, Great Britain is now at war with Germany.
After declaring war with Germany, the children in Paris and London were taken to the countryside. Then France and England asked for help from troops, their colonial powers, from Asia and Africa.
De maître cet esclave, nous avons à sauver la liberté et la dignité humaine.
Allied troops spread along the Maginot Line, a series of fortifications along the German border for 8 months. Both camps watched each other from opposite sides. In the spring of 1940, German troops launched their surprise attack around the Magen Line and in the Enns forest.
Was wir in Polen versprochen hatten, wird es in England und Frankreich.
Alle sind so nach Polen gegangen und ich wollte unbedingt doch was erleben. Ich war begeistert.
After conquering Magen and Nether, armored with rubber tires, or called Pierre, invaded Belgium, the Netherlands, and France.
Wieder ging es weiter und wir haben uns schon gewundert, dass also da kaum Gegenwehr ist.
At that time, the British troops deployed several very old armored vehicles, but these vehicles were not strong enough to face the attacks of armored tanks belonging to the German troops. Only one tank shot. The armor of the British troops was immediately destroyed, knowing the strength of the Panzer troops. The British troops moved back to the Dunker beach, and they were cornered by the German troops. They were trapped without defense. Not long afterward, planes suddenly appeared from the sky. The planes whizzed and started shooting at the British troops. The troops were cornered and couldn't do anything. They could only surrender to accept the terrible terror. In a cornered condition, the British troops took the final evacuation step, namely boarding an Allied ship. But the planes carried out low-flying attacks and started carrying out attacks. Brutal and destroyed the Allied hospital ship.
Near Dunkirk this evening, Allied troops have been deliberately machine-gunned and slaughtered by low-flying aircraft. Allied hospital ships have been attacked.
You're up to your neck. Dead bodies. The slaughter.
Approximately 338,000 Allied troops were successfully evacuated from Dunor Beach. Of this number, around 1998, 000 of whom were British troops, and the rest consisted of French-Belgian troops and a small number of troops from other countries involved in the conflict. In the battle, Dunker evacuation of fallen troops was not as large as the number of troops who were successfully evacuated, but around 68,000 to 100,000 Allied troops, including British, French, Belgian troops, and several others, are thought to have died or been captured during the fighting. During the weeks of fighting, German troops killed or captured more than 2 million Allied troops in 21 days. Nazi troops managed to take control of France and entered Paris, and the French began to push back against Germany.
France has surrendered.
Hitler was greeted as a hero. Nazi troops are now controlled most of Europe. Only Great Britain was the obstacle to Winston Churchill. The British Prime Minister in 1940 did not want to give in to Hitler's warnings. Now, Hitler was preparing his final deadly attack. He planned to carry out a large-scale invasion of Great Britain, but first he had to paralyze the British Air Force.
Britain, alone, will continue the struggle.
In a cross-English channel, the German pilots gathered for a final briefing. Meanwhile, after some of the army soldiers, Kahn Unres worked his Leverwinged Tour said that they must fight with confidence and never give up. They must defend the homeland even if their lives are at stake.
We are in one of the greatest battles in history. You ask what is our policy? It is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all the strength that God can give us. Victory at all costs. Without victory, there is no survival. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender.
After all the army troops, the British air was above a pile of thick clouds before they saw the enemy, and shooting ensued. This Air Force battle lasted for 12 weeks, and in the end, in September, as many as 1,600 German planes were shot down due to the large number of German casualties. The entire mission had to be cancelled, and the battle Great Britain came to an end, and for now, England is free from invasion. Hitler is not the only dictator looming over Europe. Italy has its own powerful person, namely Benito Mussolini, planning a deal with Hitler and preparing its own military.
Scendiamo in campo contro le democrazie dell'Occidente. Corri alle armi e dimostra la tua tenacia, il tuo coraggio, il tuo valore.
Dem England is still busy fighting Germany. Benito took advantage to invade British colonial Egypt. Meanwhile, in Europe, thousands of Allied soldiers were now prisoners of war, one of whom was Uncle Kiem, a Vietnamese soldier who served in the British Army. Then the Nazi Army began to separate colonial soldiers from other prisoners of war, shaved the heads of all the prisoners. They were given identification numbers, but the reason behind giving these numbers was not understood by the prisoners. It turned out that Nazim was doing something they called medical research to advance their racist beliefs, and this was just the beginning. Then headed to the area of the capital of Poland, namely Warsaw in Poland, which colonized, they exiled the Jewish population to an urban area known as the Jewish Village. A young man named Julian Kulski, who was 13 years old. According to his confession, he was so determined to fight the German troops that he decided to join the Polish Resistance Army. At first, he was just a slave carrying a message through a secret underground passage. Then his commander taught him to use weapons and how to kill people with a knife or bare hands after gaining knowledge in carrying out attacks. Julian's unit prepared resistance against the invaders, but their operation was discovered by the Nazis, and their commander from the Polish resistance forces was caught and immediately killed. Seeing their commander killed by Julian and several of the other children became even more angry and started looking for German troops in the city center. They met one of the German soldiers and immediately killed him, and this was the first time Julian Kulski had killed a human being. Early, they killed 20 women and children in exchange for the death of one of their troops in the Jewish village. The Jews began to be gathered and forcibly taken to camps that had been built by the Germans.
I feel responsible for the death of these poor people.